Hello everyone, welcome back to another session on grammar and usage in English. Now we will look at one of the types of information packaging constructions, namely the passive constructions. And most of the materials are taken from this book, chapter 15, and those pages are specifically for the passive constructions. What is information packaging? Firstly, so it is a way to package to convey the same information in more than one way. So information packaging constructions focus into how the information is organized and presented. And most of the time, the information that we try to present stays the same. But there will be exception, of course. And if you remember from the earlier lectures, Huddleston and Pullum describe what we call as the non-canonical and canonical clauses. And these information packaging constructions exemplify the non-canonical clauses. Here are three examples of the three types of information packaging discussed in the book. The first one is the passive 1A, passive construction. Her son was arrested by the police. 2A is extraposition construction. It's unusual for her to be delayed. 3A is existential construction, such as there were two doctors on the plane. And the book mentions that these non-canonical clauses have their basic canonical counterparts. And passive constructions has dedicated name for this basic construction or canonical one, namely active construction, such as the police arrested her son. So that is an active construction for the passive one in 1A. But extraposition and existential constructions do not have their dedicated names, so they are called just non-extraposition constructions, such as for her to be delayed is unusual, and the non-existential construction. Two doctors were on the plane. Now in this session we focus on passive constructions, different types of passive in English, and the relation between passive and active in the system of voice. So voice system is a kind of system that deals with how syntactic functions such as subject and object are linked, are mapped with semantic roles such as actor, patient in a clause. So in a clause, the participants, the noun phrases in the clause can have two relevant associations as syntactic functions in one hand and semantic roles in the other hand. And voice system in language deals with this linkage between subject, object, and the semantic roles. And formally speaking, different alignment, different linking between syntactic functions and semantic roles are marked by difference in the forms of elements of the clause. And the difference can be associated with the form of the verb, such as the verb has special inflection or auxiliaries, and the different alignments can also be associated with the form of the noun phrases. For instance, the noun phrases can have special case marking or preposition, and we will see and discuss what does this mean. Well, in active passive construction, the system that they are dealing with is the linkage, the mapping between semantic role of the subject in a clause that expresses action. Once again, active passive constructions have to do with the semantic role of the subject in the clause that expresses action. Normally, in active construction describing deliberate action, the subject is linked with the more active participant, such as the actor of the event described by the clause. In contrast, in the passive constructions, the subject is now aligned or linked with the more passive participant, namely the patient role. So patient is someone who is undergoing action carried out by the actor of the action. All right, so this is same example like before in 1A and 1B. Her son was arrested by the police, the passive. The police arrested her son, the active. And as said in the previous slides, in this active construction, the syntactic function subject is linked with the actor role, the more active participant. So in this case, the police is the subject of arrested and also the actor of arresting. So 1b describe arresting action, and another participant here is her son, which is the object of arrested, and it has the role as a patient. Okay, and this linkage in the active construction changes in the passive. In the passive, instead, her son was arrested by the police. Her son is the subject. Okay, her son is the syntactic subject of passive construction, and the semantic role is still the same. Yeah, patient. So in passive construction, the subject function is the patient of the event. Meanwhile, the actor, here the police, fills different function as a complement of preposition by. Okay, but still the actor is, the role is the actor. Okay, so that's how active passive linkage plays out in these two constructions. As said before, different alignments, active passive, between syntactic function and semantic roles are marked by difference in the forms of elements of the clause. The difference can be indicated in the form of the verb or indicated in the form of the noun phrases. And if we see in this passive construction, the forms are different from the active one. In addition to the word order difference between the participants, so here her son comes first before the verb phrase, meanwhile in the active it is the police comes first before the verb phrase. And in addition to that difference, there is also auxiliary to be present in the passive, yeah, and the verb of the passive clause in English has to be in past participle form, and then the actor role, the participant that has the actor role, now functions as a complement in the passive, yeah, complement of preposition by, and this preposition phrase is in turn also complement of the verb of the passive verb. Okay, so these are how different linkage between subject and semantic role is indicated by the difference in the form of the passive construction. And active passive construction can also occur in event that is not prototypical action. One that we saw in 1a and 1b is typical deliberate action, yeah, arresting is typical action, but there are also actions such as perception, not action, but event of perception, and emotions such as 2a and 3a. These do not describe deliberate actions that has forceful energy involved, but rather different event. 2a describe a perception, seeing, and 3a describe feeling, dislike. So the semantic role of these events are different from deliberate action. So in seeing and feeling, perception and feeling events, we have what linguists call experiencer for the more active participant, and the more passive participant is called stimulus. Stimulus is the object of perception, okay, the cause of the experiencer to feel certain feeling or to experience certain senses, yeah, perception. And this perception and feeling events can involve in active and passive variations. Most of the time, the by phrase is optional, and passive sentence without the by phrase is called short passives. Short passive is, according to the book, more frequent than long passive. Okay, long passive is the one that includes explicitly the by phrase. And why it is optional? Because it allows us to leave out what would be the obligatory element in the active clause, namely the main clause subject of the active clause. Okay, so these are examples that illustrate short passives in the B examples, and A examples are ungrammatical active version of the B. You see that all of the B examples are grammatical in English, even though there are no by phrases indicating the actor. Yeah, the house was built in 1960. Fine, even though we don't know who built the house. Your car was damaged. Accepted in English. Yeah, even though we don't know who damaged your car. Little is known about the cause of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis disease. That's fine. We don't know who should know about the cause of ALS. Mistakes were made. Okay, yeah. Focus on the mistakes, not really focus on the who. But when you try to omit the actor in the active, that doesn't work. Okay, build the house in 1960, doesn't work. Damage your car, doesn't work, and so on. Okay, so yeah, in passive, it is possible for us to leave out who does the action. Okay, and that's the function of short passive. Lexical restriction on the passive, what does it mean? Well, you may think that, well, every active clause will have the passive structure, but actually not all transitive verbs that occur in active clause may have their passive counterparts. Some transitive verb can have higher likelihood to occur in active than passive. The same way, there are verbs that tend to occur in passive in comparison to active. Let's see some data. So this is study by Stefan Gries and Stefanovic. So one of their studies includes comparing preference of verbs in active and passive constructions. And I'll try to simplify this brilliant work. If we see here on the left, these are all verbs that are much more frequent, statistically speaking, in active compared to passive. Meanwhile, all of these verbs are significantly more associated with passive structure. So verbs such as have, get, do, like, believe, okay, feel, and so on, they are strongly associated with active. Yeah, if we see this number to the left of the column, their frequency of this verb in active, while the number to the right of the column, their frequency of the verb in the passive. Okay, we see that they are more frequent in the active. Okay, and these are typical verbs that are used that are more distinctive for the passive. Okay, like base, like this study was based on, and so on. He was concerned with his son. Okay, this is used as blah blah blah. Okay, so these are example of what does lexical restriction in active and passive means. Okay, right. Next, how would you express passive in the transitive clauses? The transitives have two objects, yeah, indirect and direct objects, such as the boss gave me the key. The key is direct object, me. The recipient is the indirect object, and the passive subject of this kind of the transitive is typically the indirect object. So you have I was given the key by the boss. Okay, so the indirect object typically fills the subject of the passive. Some speakers, typically British English rather than American English, have an alternative passive. So given the same active, the transitive such as this, the boss gave me indirect, the boss gave me the key. The passive is this. So you put the direct object as the passive subject for some speakers here. So the key was given me by the boss. Okay. However, this is not that preferred, less frequent compared to passive with direct object or structure with direct object and a preposition complement with to. So you have another version of this detransitive. The boss give the key to me. So that's structure with preposition complement. And the passive is the same like in here, but with two preposition. The key was given to me by the boss. So this is the more preferable passive, where the passive subject is the direct object. Okay. Now, another type of passive is prepositional passive. What does it mean? So far, what we've seen is that the passive subject typically corresponds to an object of an active clause, either transitive active or ditransitive active. However, passive subject may well correspond to object of a preposition in an active clause. Okay, let's see some example. A examples are all active construction with preposition. 1A, people are looking into the matter. The matter is the object of preposition into, and the matter can be the passive subject, like in 1B. So the matter is being looked into. 2A, they took advantage of us. And us here is, I think, accusative form of the pronoun we. Object of, and then it becomes the subject, taking nominative case form. So we were taken advantage of. Okay, passive. Last one, someone has slept in this bed. This bed is the object of preposition in, and it can be used as the passive subject, such as this bed has been slept in. Okay, prepositional passive in English. Another kind of passive is get passive. What we've seen so far is that passive with auxiliary be, hence it is also called be passive by linguists. But get can also be a marker of passive structure. Get can occur with past participle verb to express passive. Here is some example. Pat was bitten by a snake, be passive. Pat got bitten by a snake, get passive. They weren't charged until later, be passive. They did not get charged until later, get passive. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now, how can we differentiate these two? First, be is an auxiliary verb, but get is not. So get is a lexical verb, because you can still use get in a lexical sense, such as I get the book, I get the food, I get the meal, and so on. Okay, in that case, because get is still a lexical verb, not auxiliary verb, in the negative and interrogative sentence, get passive require the dummy auxiliary do. If you see here in to be here, they did not get charged until later. Yeah, so the negative version of get should take the do dummy auxiliary. All right, and then be is stylistically neutral according to the book, but get passive marks informality. In terms of interpretation, get passives indicate that the reference to the get passive subject, yeah, the types of the get passive subject is understood to be involved in causing the situation described by the clause. In other words, the subject of the get passive has some involvement in causing the situation that is described by the clause. Another possible interpretation is that the reference to the get passive subject undergoes adverse or beneficial effect. If we see from this example, Pat got bitten by a snake. Pat, subject of the get passive, undergoes adverse effect, bad effect because of being bitten by a snake. In 3B, in other words, in contrast, she got elected mayor in 1990. She here undergoes a more beneficial effect. Yeah, elected as a mayor. That's more beneficial than get bitten by a snake. But if none of these factors present, if none of the passive subject undergoes adverse or beneficial effect, nor involved in causing the situation described by the clause, the be passive would be more preferable. Um, Such as this one. For A, several shots were heard. For B, because several shots are not, not animate compared to pet, a name, animate, she, person, animate. In this case, the be passive is acceptable. Let's see some data of how get passive and be passive differ in their frequency across different text types in Corpus of American English. In the next slide, I gave you how I can get into this graph. If we see, so the top graph is for get passive, the lower one is for be passive. And what is the clear pattern here is that the high preference of TV, the language used in TV and spoken, where get passive are more frequent, most frequent. But the least frequent in academic texts, yeah, more formal language situation. But in be passive, okay, it is more preferred in the web. I think because web is more from this corpus, I think mostly come from written text. And you see here in the TV, TV text or movie subtitle do not use get passive that much. But be passive is also frequent in the academic text. So this is how I think the difference between the stylistic difference between be passive and get passive are evidence, are shown by real language data. Okay, this is the slide that shows you how I get into that graph. Now, bare passives, another type of passive. What is this? So far, what we've seen from be passive, get passive, we all have marker for the passive, yeah, either auxiliary be or the lexical verb get. Yeah, past participle occurs with marker of passive with be or lexical get. However, these past participle verbs indicating passive can also occur elsewhere in other clauses without any marker of be and get, but these past participle clauses can still convey passive interpretation. Okay, because these participle clauses do not have the be and get markers, they are called bare passives. Okay, and bare passive can function as complement and modifier. When bare passive verbs function as complements, they typically occur with some verbs that can have bare passive as their complements, such as have, get, order, and see. One, we had the documents checked by a lawyer. So the relevant past participle verbs here is checked, but we see there is no be auxiliary or get auxiliary here, but we know sentence such as one conveys passive interpretation, and especially by the presence of this by a lawyer phrase, yeah, by a lawyer. So a lawyer here is the actor who checks the documents. Number two, you should get yourself vaccinated against the disease. Again, no auxiliary, but we know that you need to be vaccinated. Okay, we know this indicates passive interpretation. See order the records destroyed, passive interpretation without any auxiliary. Lastly, he saw his son beaten down by someone sketchy. Beaten down is the past participle verb, no marker of passive, but we have this by phrase here that indicates the actor of this passive event. Okay, so these are some examples of bare passive functioning as complements of these four verbs. Bare passive as modifier has to do with its use in noun phrase related to a relative clause, such as we want a house built after 1990. Okay, you can express this using relative clause. We want a house which was built after 1990. Okay, Number two, the complaint made by her lawyer is being investigated. So here, same, no marker of passive, but we have this past participle verb followed by phrase. So you can say this in full relative clause, such as the complaint was made by her lawyer is being investigated. Right. This is the last type, adjectival passives. We know that be can be followed by an adjective as its complement, such as she is smart, she is beautiful, he is handsome. But sometimes the adjective following be can be in the form of past participle verb. So now you ask a question like, how can we differentiate between adjectival passives and the true be passive? Okay, well, whenever you have past participle verbs follows form of be, there will be two possible interpretation: be passive, the genuine be passive interpretation, or the adjectival passive interpretation. Here we have 1A and 1B. Her leg was broken, the be marker of the passive clause. They were married, again be passive marker. Yeah, but these two sentences can have genuine be passive interpretation or adjectival passive interpretation. If we focus on 1A first, as a passive, as a true be passive clause, 1A describes an event. Her leg was broken in a hockey accident. So this describes an event where and how her leg was broken. But in the adjectival passive interpretation, in this case, in a complex intransitive clause, that is an intransitive clause containing a predicative complement such as her leg was sore, this interpretation describes a state, okay, a state that is the result, the effect of an earlier event. In this stative interpretation, broken only, not the whole clause, is adjectival passive. Okay, only in this stative interpretation, okay, not the whole clause. In 1B, the same. The be passive interpretation involves an event. Yeah, if you want to interpret 1B as a true, genuine be passive, this should be in the context of event, such as they were married in the college chapel. Okay, that's describing an event of wedding. Okay, they were married in the college chapel. But if you want to have adjectival complex intransitive interpretation, this sentence in 1B describes a state which is a result of a prior event of wedding. So that's why you can say something like, they were still happily married. This will introduces adjectival passive interpretation. So now, how would you differentiate? Yeah, what is actually the key syntactic feature of adjectival passive but not the be passive? An adjectival passive can occur with complex intransitive verbs other than be. So you will have something like her leg felt broken. Here the verbs other than be that can occur with adjectival passive is feel. Yeah, so you can feel stranded, you can feel broken, you can feel abandoned. Okay, those are examples of adjectival passive. Another example of verbs with adjectival passive complement is stay. They stay married. They stay. What else? Other kind of past participle verbs. Okay, and in these sentences, broken and married have only adjectival stative interpretation. Okay, so these are the key syntactic feature differentiating adjectival passive and be passive. Yeah, slide 40, last slide, and I hope to see you soon next week. And I have a quiz for this passive lecture in OASA, so stay tuned. Bye bye.